Okay, picture this. The year is 61 CE. The Roman province of Britain, still a new and volatile territory, suddenly goes up in flames. This wasn't just any rebellion. This was one of the most savage, most bloody uprisings the Roman Empire ever had to face. It's an incredible story about a queen, a kingdom that was completely betrayed, and a revolt that came dangerously close to kicking Rome off the island for good. Let's dive right into this absolutely pivotal chapter of history. And that's really the big question at the heart of this whole story, isn't it? The saga of Boudica is a brutal, unforgettable lesson in what happens when an empire's arrogance and greed just goes one step too far, and when it fatally underestimates the people it's trying to rule. And the fallout was just staggering. To give you a sense of the sheer scale of the violence, we're talking about an estimated 80,000 people, Roman citizens and their allies, killed. This was no minor border skirmish. This was a shockwave that almost shattered the entire Roman project in Britain. So how on earth did it get to this point? Well, to understand the explosion, we have to look at the fuse. And it all starts with a political arrangement that was, shaky from day one. You see, the Iceni tribe, living in what's now East Anglia, were what the Romans called a client kingdom. This meant their king, Prasutagus, had to perform this really delicate balancing act. On one hand, he had to keep up the appearance of being an independent ruler for his own people. On the other, he had to be a loyal buffer and partner for the Romans. It was a deal that kind of worked, but it was a deal that was tied to him, and only him. Now, Prasutagus wasn't naive. He knew this whole setup was incredibly fragile and could fall apart the second he was gone. So he tries this clever, if desperate move to protect his kingdom and his family. He writes a will, and in it, he names the Emperor Nero himself as a co-heir, right alongside his own two daughters. The logic you have to assume was that the emperor would surely protect the inheritance of his fellow heirs, right? Well, it was a massive diplomatic gamble that was about to backfire in the worst way imaginable. The moment Prasutagus died, the local Roman administrator, a man named Decianus, didn't see a treaty to be honored. He saw a payday. The will was just tossed aside. As you can see, the Romans started acting like they'd just annexed the place. They seized royal lands, plundered the homes of Iceni nobles, and then, to add insult to injury, they called in massive loans they'd made to the tribe, basically bankrupting the entire kingdom overnight. And things escalated from bad to worse with terrifying speed. The king dies, the Romans move in, and his widow, Queen Boudica, does what any leader would do. She protests. She stands up for her people's rights. The Roman response wasn't a negotiation. It was an act of pure, calculated cruelty designed to break her and her people. Boudica, the queen, was publicly stripped and beaten with rods like a common slave. And her daughters, her young daughters, were raped. This was no longer just about greed. This was an act of profound, personal, dehumanizing violence. This was the spark. So you can imagine what happens next. That personal horror, that ultimate humiliation, transforms a wronged queen into the leader of a furious, massive army bent on revenge. And Boudica wasn't shouting into the void. People were ready to listen, because the Iceni weren't the only tribe that was suffering. Their neighbors, the Trinovantes, had already had their land stolen to build a retirement community for Roman soldiers. They were being crushed by taxes to build a temple to the emperor who conquered them in the first place. On top of that, you've got famine, you've got aggressive debt collectors, and, crucially, the Roman governor and his best legions are miles and miles away. It was the perfect storm. The result? An army of absolutely staggering size. Historians estimate that Boudica managed to unite up to 120,000 warriors from different tribes. Let that sink in. This wasn't just a raiding party. This was basically an entire nation rising up in arms. So with this massive new army, Boudica unleashes hell. And for a while, it seemed like absolutely nothing could stop the tidal wave of her revenge. And here is something just incredible. We know exactly where they went, because they left a literal scar in the earth that archaeologists can still find today. It's called the Boudican layer. If you dig down underneath modern cities like London or Colchester, you find it. This thick black and red layer of ash, charcoal, and burnt debris. It's the physical evidence of the fires of 61 CE. And make no mistake, this wasn't random violence. They had a hit list. First, they went for Camalodunum, modern Colchester, the symbol of Roman oppression, and they completely wiped out a Roman legion that tried to intervene. Then they marched on Londinium, the rich, undefended commercial center, which the governor had to abandon to its fate. It was sacked and burned to the ground. And finally, they destroyed Verulamium, a town full of pro-Roman Britons, proving this was also a brutal civil war against anyone who sided with the invaders. But you can't ever count Rome out. The governor, Suetonius Paulinus, managed to pull his legions together. He knew he had one chance, one final do-or-die battle to save the entire province from collapsing. So you've got this incredible matchup, right? It's a clash of two totally different philosophies of war. On one side, you have the Roman legionaries, professional, disciplined, heavily armored killing machines fighting in tight formations. And on the other, you have this huge, passionate horde of British warriors, fueled by rage, relying on sheer numbers, but much more lightly equipped and far less organized. It was the ultimate test of quality versus quantity. And this is where Roman generalship really shines. Suetonius was a brilliant tactician. He looked at his tiny army and Boudica's massive one and thought, okay, how do I turn their greatest strength into their fatal weakness? He picked his battlefield perfectly, a narrow valley, a defile, with woods protecting his flanks and his rear. This forced the Britons into a funnel, a bottleneck, where their massive numbers meant nothing. In fact, they just got in each other's way. The result was an absolute slaughter. The Britons, trapped and unable to maneuver, were just systematically cut down. The Romans unleashed volleys of their heavy javelins, then advanced with their shields locked, stabbing with their short swords. The Roman sources claim a victory so total it's hard to even comprehend. Something like 80,000 Britons killed for the loss of only 400 Romans. In a single horrific afternoon, the rebellion was utterly crushed. Now, you might think, okay, rebellion over, story ends here. But in a way, this is where the story gets even more interesting. Because even in failure, Boudica's revolt would give birth to a new Roman Britain and turn a defeated queen into an immortal legend. Here's the great irony. By losing the war, you could argue Boudica won the peace. The sheer ferocity of her uprising terrified Rome to its core. A new administrator sent to the province basically told the Emperor Nero, look, this policy of brutal exploitation isn't working. It's too expensive and it's unsustainable. Rome had a light bulb moment. They realized a stable, productive Britain was way more profitable than a province that was constantly on fire. So they completely changed their strategy, shifting from punishment to partnership, from exploitation to integration. They even funded the rebuilding of the cities Boudica had destroyed, kicking off 350 years of a unique, blended Romano-British culture. But here's the catch, right? Everything we know about Boudica, every single detail, comes to us from her enemies, from two Roman historians, and they paint wildly different portraits. Tacitus, writing closer to the event, portrays her as this noble figure who was wronged by Roman corruption. But then you have Cassius Dio, writing more than a century later, and he describes her as this terrifying, almost inhuman force of nature. Two Roman perspectives, two very different Boudica. And this is what's so fascinating. Over the centuries, Boudica became a blank canvas. People projected whatever they needed onto her. To the Romans, she was the barbarian villain. But to the Tuners, she was a kind of proto-Queen Elizabeth I, defending England. Then, in the ultimate irony, the Victorians took this anti-imperial rebel and turned her into a symbol of the British Empire. And today, she's often celebrated as a feminist icon, a powerful symbol of resistance. In the end, Boudica is still this powerful enigma. A queen who led a failed rebellion that ended up fundamentally changing Roman policy for the better. We only know her story through the words of the empire that crushed her. And yet, she's become one of Britain's most iconic national heroes. Her ability to be reshaped and reinterpreted by every new generation is maybe her most incredible legacy. It's a timeless, powerful story about what happens when people decide they've finally had enough.